I'm gonna make my raid comp. I'm gonna make the ideal raid comp for Nomergon today, and I'm gonna seriously think about it and make what I think will be the meta for P2. So let's very quickly just look at the stats of Black Fathom Deeps for boss damage to bosses, and we'll go like an average rogue is beating a average warrior right now because warriors scale better with gear. So if you go to like the 95th percentile, you're going to see warriors start to take over, and in the 99th percentile, warriors should have a clear lead, which they do. You know, when priests get shadow form, they'll actually become a viable DPS. Now, one of the things I looked at was that priest is going to get about 40% more damage in P2, but a lot of casters are going to struggle because they get next ranks of some of their skills at like level 42. So you're looking at 64 DPS. 40% of that is essentially 30 damage. So that would put them about here. If they had shadow form now, they would be closer to where warlocks are at. So priests, I do feel like priests will come online, and they'll be just probably right underneath warlocks. Now, warlock is very dependent on having a fire mage in the raid. And so if a warlock has a fire mage in the raid, then he's going to do a lot more DPS. So I do think you want one warlock, one fire mage in your raid. I don't know if there's a spot for Ellie or enhanced shamans at this time, and I don't know if there's a spot for a shadow priest, since they don't really bring anything else to the raid, and healing priest is the best overall. So let's go ahead and make the best raid comp. And so if I was going to make my ideal composition for going into Nomergon, I think I'm going to be taking a shaman tank to drop Wind Fury. And you guys can let me know if you think that this is a bad group or a good group or whatever you think about it. But I think that this group will probably be meta. You want one marksman hunter with true shot aura to juice up your warriors. And I'm guessing people will probably still be playing arms because of Mortal Strike. And then in the group 2, I don't know if you want a feral or not. Feral, you can have a feral get 3% crit to the group with the feral buff. So maybe you put one feral here. I'm not really sure if you bring a rogue or not. I don't think you... I guess you could, one of these guys, these warriors could be subbed out with rogues or warriors, I think, but you just need one warrior minimum. So if we were just going to go with a non-cheesy comp, like all warriors, you could probably have a feral. You could probably have one feral in here for the buff, or you could have a feral tank. So it's got to be an enhancement shaman tank with Wind Fury Totem, and then so you're gonna want one Disc Priest for healing, and probably one Boomkin for the debuff, as well as an off healer. So you'll have a balanced druid with wild growth to do off healing, and then you'll have one fire mage. You'll have one Destro warlock. To fire mage to juice the Destro warlock's damage. Fire mage for the arcane intellect. Destro lock for to provide curse of recklessness, as well as hellstones to your group. And then the last spot is up for debate. You think Elisham? You think shaman and priest healer? I was thinking Boomkin for the fairy fire and wild growth off healing. And then the fire mage can just take a regeneration rune and heal the tank by himself with living flame. So you also have that. Is Mana Totem sub 40? I'm not sure. Ellie Mastery could be nuts. Shadow Priest is going to be good for next phase, but like right here, we're trying to take all players that buff the raid and give like party wide buffs for their party. So maybe Elemental Shaman here is what I'm thinking. Okay, so this right here is probably what I'm thinking will be the meta comp for P2 for most amount of damage. Unless the 3% crit from the feral druid, we could probably squeeze one of those in there. Let's just put one feral druid here. And now it's kind of this, when you have the feral druid in here for the buff, it's kind of up for debate whether or not you would just not put another warrior in here. And if you didn't want to have it stacked with all warriors, then you could do a rogue here as well. Probably Asa Rogue or something like that. Or maybe it'll be Outlaw because there'll be no poisons next for Nomergon. So if you wanted to have like a really balanced comp, you could do this. You could have an Ellie Shaman in group 2. Typically in Classic, you're going to want a Shaman in every group anyway because they usually provide some kind of beneficial totems for every group. I know in Classic rating in general, in Era, you want 8 Shamans because totems are party-wide, not raid-wide. So every group gets some kind of Shaman, whether it is an Enhanced Shaman for Wind Fury or Elemental Shaman to juice the Caster's Abyss. And Shamanistic Rage is really nice to provide back mana to the group. So I think Shamans will definitely come online in P2. And maybe you still want a Feral Druid for the buff. I think that this is probably the most meta group for P2, unless somebody's going to just be stacking warriors or something like that. This is assuming all classes kind of start to ramp up in P2. I think that this is, if you're playing one of these classes for P2, you're going to be pretty safe as far as getting a group slot. Now, if you're playing Alliance, you're going to want at least 2 Paladins typically in Alliance. You could probably just sub these out right here, Prot Pally, and then just for the buffs, having 2 Paladins in your raid for the buffs is very good. Would you just run 2 healers and then have these 3 focused damage? Because what we're doing right now, the raids are pretty easy. So if you're playing with like top players, I don't feel like right now you need 2 healers in the raid. So maybe you could swap this into a Ret. I just don't think that Ret's damage is viable enough to bring them as a DPS. Now you can obviously clear the raid as Ret Paladin, no problem. You could probably clear it with just 10 Ret Paladins. But we're talking about like what's going to be the best group overall, and I feel like Ret Paladin would not fit into that slot. Curious if the best caster group might be 3 mages for P2 because AoE is so nice. Yeah, you don't need a Ret Pally for Pally buffs, exactly, Dragark. So like, that's like why I think primarily you're going to be bringing a H-Pal to the raid instead of a Ret. And then you'd probably just put the Rogue back in here. I imagine the Alliance side will probably look something like this. 2 Paladins for the buffs. Marksman for True Shot and Lion. Even though Paladins already have Kings. Feral, of course, for the 3% buff to the melee here. And then, of course, you also have Wild Strikes now. You'll need a Feral in Group 1 on the Alliance side. Whereas Horde side doesn't really need one. But then Rogue and Warrior and Hunter will carry the DPS in the group, while Destruction and Fire will kind of be just slowly behind them. And then Balanced Druid for utility with 2 healers. Now, whether or not you need this H-Pal is up for discussion. You could replace it with another Destro Lock. You don't really have a spot for another melee. Like, you don't have a spot for a Ret Paladin in the meta group, in my opinion. If you did, you'd have to take out the Rogue, which would lower your overall DPS of the group. So maybe in this group, you probably want another caster or something, somebody that's not really benefiting from the Wild Strikes. So you could do another Destro Lock. You know, this last slot on the Alliance side is going to be up for debate. You could probably swap that out with just another caster, like maybe you could try a Shadow Priest in there. Maybe you could throw another Destro Lock, preferably somebody that uses fire damage, because you're getting buffed by the Fire Mage. So we could even throw in here just another Destro Lock. And this could be a standard alliance comp that I think would be pretty good if you don't need the healing from the H-Pal, because like I said, the Fire Mage can throw on the regen rune, the Balanced Druid can throw wild growth while he's maintaining, you know, his Fairy Fire, and that's pretty much a standard comp with 2 different options for Alliance and Horde that I think is going to be meta going into P2. So if you're playing one of those classes, I think you're very safe and you shouldn't have problems getting into groups. But of course, if you're on the Alliance side, the Feral Druid will continue to be the most wanted character in every raid. You actually can't you just won't do a raid without a Feral Druid. Now on the Horde side, Shamans will slowly start to take over. So on the Horde side, every group is going to want a Shaman. So if you are playing Shaman, I predict you'll have no issues getting into groups at all in P2. Whereas on the Alliance side, you're going to want a Feral Druid in every single raid. Of course, you'll want... On the Alliance side, you don't even really need the Hunter because you have Paladins. But on the Horde side, you're going to have 1 Hunter in every single raid, which there's a billion Hunters. It's actually the most played class. They continue to do really good damage, and you can even have 1 or 2 Hunters in your raid and be absolutely fine. I just think that this particular group right here will probably be meta if you're trying to stack your group in week 1 in order to clear Nomergon. So if anyone out there was looking for a little advice on what to play, I highly recommend, you know, one of these classes, whether you're on Horde or Alliance.